Hey, good morning, y'all. Josh of Severe Weather. Happy Friday, January 19th to you. We've got a winter storm in progress here across the Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic region. I'll talk about that, but some big changes coming next week that unfortunately are going to have some detrimental effects on a lot of the United States. Let's take a look at areas I believe we need to start preparing for significant amounts of rain and maybe significant flooding. The first area of concern across parts of the south central United States from southeast Texas through Louisiana, Mississippi, northern Alabama into the Tennessee Valley. A big warm up coming, but a very active southern jet stream expected to bring us significant rain. The other area of concern is the Pacific Northwest, Northern California, and Western British Columbia, with potentially catastrophic amounts of rain coming up and over areas that have been dealing with snow and freezing rain over the last week or so. And that could lead to major flooding across these basins. These areas have had a lot of dry weather recently, especially the south central US. This is going to help longer term, but it's going to be too much of a good thing and one that could be very disastrous for us here. So let's take a look at the current weather setup, and then we'll talk about next week when these problems are going to unfold. And what you see on the map here, let me grab my pen for you. I wish it would just pop right up. It doesn't, unfortunately, but we see a upper level feature here kind of dropping south and east. We've got kind of an inverted trough that extends from the Great Lakes right across the Mason-Dixon line into northern portions of Maryland. And what this is going to do is it's going to track through this area and produce an enhanced area of snow later today into tonight. Surface low pressure near the coast is going to be heading out to sea. So for those of us in New England and portions of the Northeast, not really a major snow event, but one that could thump us pretty good here for a little while here later today into this evening, primarily around the Philly area, northern Delaware, Northeast Maryland, South Jersey. New York City, the trends have been to shift this area of heaviest snow off to your south a little bit. So we continue to find a way to lose on getting significant snow in New York. We are going to see some snow, certainly, but I think the worst of it stays to the south of Interstate 78. So I'm going to talk about that here. We do see an active southern jet stream across Florida, but this is going to shift south as we see a piece of the polar vortex here shift southeast and bring us our coldest air of the season to the southeast. And this will get down into Florida temporarily as well. So colder weather is coming to central and eventually South Florida this weekend, but it isn't going to last too long. Next week, we've got ourselves a big increase in moisture moving into the Pacific Northwest. Very wet weather expected across this area. We're going to see a ridge in place here. And actually, we're going to see this trough that's moving into the southwest shift east, pick up this moisture and bring a very wet setup here to portions of the south next week. So a very active setup coming, and one that I think can be very concerning for some of us here. I'm going to get to this hazards map in just actually, we'll talk about it now. But we do have winter storm warnings in pink across portions of the mid-Atlantic region and around the Great Lakes. That is bounded by areas in purple that are under winter weather advisory from Iowa over to New York City and Long Island, and down as far south as far northern Alabama and northern Georgia, although I think that portion will be allowed to expire. Freeze warnings across portions of the Gulf region. I think at this point we're kind of used to this cold that's settled in, but it's still pretty cold. And then ahead of our next system, we do have some winter weather advisories, watches here in the Sierra Nevada, and warnings in interior portions of the Northwest, with a dense fog advisory for the Southern Valley of California. Some big sweeping changes coming again here in just a little bit. Let's take a look at the Mid-Atlantic Great Lakes region. Winter storm warnings in effect for much of West Virginia, northwestern West Virginia, or Western Virginia, kind of weird, but west of Whiteville, far southeastern Kentucky, Western Maryland, Laurel Highlands here, and Alleghenies, far southeast Ohio. And then we also have winter storm warnings in effect from Loudoun County, Virginia, right across central and northeastern Maryland into the northern half of Delaware and into much of South Jersey and southeastern Pennsylvania. Millions of folks under these winter storm warnings. And many of you have not really seen a winter storm. We've seen some lighter to moderate snow. In fact, we saw that earlier in the week. This is going to be a little bit more significant across this area, as we are not dealing with mixing. In fact, we're dealing with cold air settling in behind this system. So snow should be on the ground throughout most of the weekend here across this portion of the Mid-Atlantic region. Farther north, we have a winter weather advisory at this point. There will be accumulating snow in this entire area, even in the Northeast PA, but the amounts tend to be higher off to your south. So New York City, we are probably going to miss out on significant snow from this. We'll see a light snowfall That'll fall much of the afternoon and cause some travel snarls, but more of a nuisance snow, maybe some school closings, more of that than, say, a more crippling storm like neighbors to your south. We also have to watch lake enhanced snow over much of northern Ohio into northwestern Pennsylvania, northwest Indiana, and southwestern Michigan, where we could see some intense rates of snow falling here over the next couple of days. Here's a look at the current radar from Radar Omega, and we can see there is a bit of a rain snow line here tracking through the lower portions of the Potomac Basin, right across Chesapeake Bay and into southeastern portions of Delaware and far South Jersey, right around Cape May. But primarily, we're seeing light snowfall across this area here, across Maryland and Pennsylvania. Nothing too heavy at this point, but the ground is cold, so it's not having any problem sticking to the ground. Now, when the second piece of energy arrives behind it, the one that's bringing some light snow into Indiana and Ohio and northern Kentucky, we will see these rates of snow increasing across this area, and there should not be any mixing on land. Maybe the immediate shoreline does see a little bit of rain this afternoon, but primarily we're dealing with snowfall as we get through the afternoon. So this area of significant snow is going to start building and shifting more to the north and east as the day wears on, and will find its way all the way into southern New England by late this afternoon into this evening. I'm going to show you guys amounts of snow here in just a little bit. Here's a look at the predicted radar from the NAM model, and you can see how that snow is going to spread eastward. This is 10 a.m. this morning Eastern time, so all of the Northeast will be dealing with snow except for New England. And then as we get into the afternoon, you'll see there's some enhancement here still over the lower Delaware Valley, central and eastern Maryland, and much of Delaware here, but not that much when you get north of New York City. As the day wears on and into this evening, we see this snow shifting offshore. It should wind down here around 10 or 11 o'clock tonight, and then we just see lake effect behind it. And that, by the way, could cause its own issues here as this colder air is set to arrive here tonight and tomorrow. We could see some snow squalls impacting portions of areas off the Great Lakes, even all the way down into central and southeastern Ohio this evening and overnight tonight into West Virginia, somewhere between Huntington and Point Pleasant. There could be a band of heavy snow falling here overnight tonight. So don't be caught off guard completely with that. But we do see this pattern turning milder as we get later into the weekend. Then our next storm system moves into California on Saturday night and Sunday, and we'll see snow across the interior, but heavy amounts of rain possible Saturday night and first thing on Sunday across California. And that starts what's going to be a big pattern thaw for us here in the central and eastern U.S., and unfortunately what could be a significant amount of rain falling as well. Here's a look at how the snow is going to total up today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I am actually going to show you guys some little more detail, but this is the HRRR model. You can see the areas that are favored are around the lakes as well as into the central and northern Appalachians here, or at least the Laurel Highlands and Alleghenies, and then also an area across the mid-Atlantic that we'll be watching. And sorry, I thought I had the actual image. There we go. Snow totals in Michigan are highly favoring the lakes, 8 inches or so around Traverse City, a little bit less down towards Muskegon, and then probably the biggest amounts are going to be near the Indiana border, where there is the potential for 2 feet of snow to fall here. There could be another band farther inland that drops about a foot as well, so keep that in mind in places like Holland, Michigan. The rest of lower Michigan will see a relatively light snow, generally speaking 1 to 2 inches, according to the HRRR model. And this is all in the next 24 hours to 48 hours, so through Sunday morning. Looking farther south into the lower Great Lakes, we see the potential for 5 inches of snow in South Bend, but there will be a very intense band setting up west of you in South Bend that could affect places like Michigan City and LaPorte with over a foot of snow. And if you believe this one model, there will be somebody in here that picks up potentially 2 feet of snow right near the border here. So conditions may vary wildly, but in this band, we're expecting an all-out snowstorm here over the next 24 to 48 hours. Farther south, though, amounts are going to be a lot lighter, generally an inch or so. So again, not a major snowfall, maybe 2 inches around Cincinnati. And you can see this band right here extending into Ohio. I'm going to show you guys that here in a little bit. Don't be shocked here in Ohio if there's a band that goes from Fort Wayne right down through Columbus and down to Parkersburg that dumps some pretty good snow overnight tonight into the early part of tomorrow morning, covering roadways and causing some issues here with travel and maybe some dangerously low visibility somewhere within this band. So we could see a snow squall advisory or warning issued here overnight tonight somewhere across this area. Pretty good fetch of wind from the northwest coming off Lake Michigan will make it all the way down into the mid-Ohio Valley into West Virginia. Locally around Lake Erie, we also see enhanced amounts of snow, maybe 5 or even 6 inches in the Cleveland area, more to the north and east towards Ashtabula, and then up towards Erie, PA, 6 to 8 inches expected. So this will be kind of more of a moderate snow, especially compared to recent winters. Farther south, not as much, but we are still seeing snow this morning, an inch or two in northern and eastern Kentucky. We also see the potential for a couple of inches, maybe even up to 6 inches falling in the Smokies here. Asheville, 0.2 inches. Again, I think that's probably just going to be in the higher portions of the Asheville area, mainly towards the Parkway. We are probably going to extend our drought here almost 2 years for seeing an inch of snow in Asheville, North Carolina. It's pretty crazy. There will be a little bit of ice down in this area as well that we need to keep an eye on. Here's the amount of that. Not a lot, but we may see potentially a 1/4 inch of ice in the higher terrain here after or before it snows and then goes back over to snow, but not an issue for Asheville or Brevard. Probably not a major issue for Murphy or Cullowhee or Franklin. It's more the higher elevations that we have these areas of concern for ice. Looking farther north and east, this is not going to bring much outside of the mountains until you get up into the northern Shenandoah Valley. Maybe a little bit of snow near Richmond and on North Virginia Beach. It's showing 0.8 falling. I think that's probably overdone. Really got to get into Nova to see that significant amount of snow, 1 to 3 inches, generally speaking, from places like Fredericksburg on northward to DC, and especially up into Loudoun County where that winter storm warning is in effect. There will be higher amounts. But take a look at some of these snow totals. Charleston, 4 or 5 inches of snow. We continue to kind of miss out in Charleston. This one may actually bring us a decent amount. And then if you're traveling down towards Beckley, we may see a little bit more. The ski areas are probably going to pick up over a foot of snow out of this during the day today and into the early part of the weekend. Farther back, southwestern Virginia down 81. This looks to be a narrow miss for us once again. Johnson City may pick up an inch more towards Mountain City, but really it's the higher elevations, the Grayson Highlands, that pick up those higher amounts of snow. Looking at the Mid-Atlantic region here, this is going to be a decent snow for us. Montgomery County, Loudoun County, 4-inch potential. Hagerstown, maybe 4 inches. Baltimore, 3 or 4 inches. And then you get over to the eastern portion of Maryland and near Dover, Middletown, up to DuPont, we do see the potential for over 4 inches of snow falling. We haven't seen snow like that here in a couple of years. It's not a big snow, but it will be of significance for you here this afternoon into this evening before things wind down later in the evening. Southeastern Maryland, maybe an inch falls. When you get down to the eastern shore of Virginia, amounts are going to be pretty light. It shows an inch falling, but I don't think a lot of that even sticks to the ground, just to be honest with you guys. So around the DC, Baltimore, Annapolis area, generally speaking, we have the potential to see about 3 inches of snow. Northern Delaware, 4, maybe 5 inches. And then Montgomery County up to Loudoun County, also the potential to see 4 or 5 inches, especially in those higher spots here. And then up against the foothills, maybe about 5 inches falls. In Pennsylvania, the Laurel Highlands take the cake, also off of Lake Erie, 5-6 inches of snow falls. The rest of central and eastern PA probably looking at about 3 inches. I do think these amounts around Philly could get enhanced. So I would not be shocked to see some higher totals somewhere here around Philadelphia County, Chester County, even parts of Lower Bucks and Montgomery could pick up more than 3 inches. But I think the higher amounts are going to be confined to South Jersey here. Also, Pittsburgh area could see a few inches, lesser amounts off to your north of PGH. So that's what we're looking at. I thought I had another graphic, and I probably did, but I don't want to ignore you folks in New York City or New England. You are still anxiously awaiting a big snowfall in New York. We keep getting these little nickel and dime events, and I think this one looks the same, about an inch in New York City. It looked more impressive to me a few days ago, but the dynamics of this storm have shifted just a bit to your south, and that big difference cuts down on your snow total significantly. We could still see an inch of snow on Long Island, maybe even 2 or 3 inches if the conditions are right here today. But overall, outside of the highlands where we may see an inch or two, outside of the Hudson Valley here and maybe the Catskills, not really a big event, just a minor snowfall. There may be some enhancement, though, here over southeastern Mass and the islands, some ocean effect snow, believe it or not, despite the fact that the ocean typically kills our snow chances and brings us over to rain. This will be a snow event, and it could produce some heavier snow rates here tonight and first thing tomorrow across this region. So anyway, moving on, we see quite a bit of moisture next week. Big time rain coming. Some of this is going to be frozen here around the Great Lakes, and we do see the potential for major amounts of snow somewhere down south as well as the Northwest. And with how busy things have been here, this is going to be an extreme event for some of us. we see this big attack of cold air coming this weekend, piece of the polar vortex, and then very quickly it retreats northward and a ridge takes over. Now, between the trough moving into the west, bringing that unsettled weather into the southwestern US next week, and the ridge that's going to take over here in the eastern United States and centered over the Ohio Valley, there's going to be a transitional flow of very active weather, storm after storm coming into Texas and the southern plains. And eventually that moisture heads up into the ridge here, or where the ridge is, I should say, and produces just a significant amount of wet weather. And this pattern continues, unfortunately, throughout the entire week before we see some shifting and more of a trough taking over here at the very end of January and especially early February. So we are going to see cold air returning, and we're going to see the fire hose get shut off in the east, but probably not until the very end of January and the very beginning of the month of February. After that, we do see potentially some colder air dropping down, but there is uncertainty on how exactly that looks. But things start looking a little bit more favorable after about the 3rd of February for that to happen. Here's a look at the temperature departures, and you can see the cold that we have this weekend gets wiped out quickly by next week. And most of the country is very balmy for this time of the year, except for Texas and parts of the Southwest where we have precipitation. Florida is going to be actually a little bit cooler at the end of the month, but most of the country is warmer. But then take a look at the cold returning here across the South, across the Rockies. There may be a shot of extreme cold somewhere in this, but overall, this averages to just a few degrees below average. This is classic El Nino, by the way, where we have this mild air in place over Canada and chillier air in place across the mid-Atlantic, the Southeast, and the interior of the West. And that's going to take over here during February and could produce or could be an important ingredient to what will be some significant amounts of winter weather, potentially. Here's a look at our rainfall anomaly here next week. It gets very wet across the south central states, a drought busting rain, but more significantly, a flooding rain for some of us here. So we do need to prepare for this. Also, the Pacific Northwest stays quite wet as well. So next week looks very wet, and then things are going to moderate after that as we see a return of colder, drier air for the beginning of the month of February. Here's a look at where we're at this morning, and it has warmed up temporarily here in the southeast, but that's not going to last. It'll turn much colder. You can see this next wave of cold dropping down through the plains. It's dropped 50 degrees since this time yesterday morning in Casper, Wyoming, 23 degrees colder than this time yesterday in Kansas City, 31 degrees colder in Lubbock. So we do have another wave of very cold air coming down here, but it's not going to be very long-lived. If you look at today's highs, you will see very cold here across the upper Midwest. But then tonight it really gets cold. We see sub-zero temperatures down close to Kansas City again. It's still mild in Florida, but it is turning colder across the rest of the Gulf region. And tomorrow we see much colder temperatures, struggling to get past freezing in Charlotte and Raleigh, staying below freezing in Birmingham and Atlanta, and very cold here across the southern Appalachians. We'll see teens for highs in places like Boone and Mountain City. Very cold across New England, single digits and teens will stay below freezing throughout the entire weekend. It looks like across the Northeast, except maybe New York City sneaks just past. But as we get to next week, though, we do see some moderation very quickly. And next week, we're already above average again down south. And that warming trend continues. So a great week to visit Florida, as we're going to see not a super wet week in Florida. There'll be some rain towards Tuesday and Wednesday, but overall, pretty decent week to be down there, and even warming up quite a bit in the Carolinas and in the Gulf states by Wednesday, when we'll have temperatures that are 10 degrees above average for many of this region. Notice how outside of the Rockies here and maybe North Dakota and northern Maine on Wednesday, the entire country is going to be above the freezing mark. So we see a massive thaw coming here for the next several days next week. And that, of course, isn't going to help out with our flood situation either. Here's a look at the GFS model from earlier today. You see this big shot of cold coming here behind our storm tomorrow. Then you see storms moving into the west. And this first piece arrives Monday across southeast Texas, Louisiana. A lot of rain with it expected. Probably not too much severe weather, but I think there will be thunderstorms in southeast Texas, southwestern Louisiana. Some frozen precipitation possible on the onset here around St. Louis, central Illinois, and some snow around the Great Lakes. There's still some cold air here in eastern Canada, although it is retreating. Cold enough, though, for some snow on the front end of this system over the upper Midwest into the interior of the Northeast. But generally speaking, we're seeing more and more rain over the southern U.S., and another wave comes in on Wednesday and Thursday and produces some tremendous potential rainfall across the lower Mississippi Valley and across the western Gulf states. That's going to shift eastward, and we should have a wet end of the week across the mid-Atlantic region with some front end ice potential here in the interior of the Northeast, but primarily rain for the big cities, even Boston here by Friday night and Saturday of next week. That will continue into early next week after, and then we see some chillier, more seasonal air returning. That's where my map went. All right. So looking at our rainfall potential from the GFS, we see many places down south with the potential for getting at least 4 inches of rain and the potential somewhere in here for over a foot of rain. And that's going to be disastrous for some folks here. So do start preparing for that now. This could shift, but we could see somebody in this area picking up more than a foot of rain, maybe even 16, 18 inches. Really tough to predict that being a week in advance, but it is coming, and it's going to be coming pretty hard for us here across this region. The Northwest also gets very wet with rain potential of 6 to 10 inches across much of the coastal Northwest. Higher elevations have the potential to see 20 inches plus of rain. With all the snow and ice we just got, all that's got to have to melt. And unfortunately, that's going to feed down into the rivers and maybe cause some significant flooding here in this area of the Northwest. So it's going to come in multiple waves starting this weekend, continuing through next week. And unfortunately, that's going to cause us widespread problems. Let's look at the longer term. This is the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. And right now it's heading into some milder phases. You can see we're in phases 4 and 5, showing that we're going to thaw out here. 5, 6, and early 7 here are mild phases in the United States. But there is a transition back into colder phases predicted here as we get into the beginning of February, and especially towards the second and third weeks of February. So we are going to see more widespread cold returning. This thaw is only going to be with us about a week to a week and a half, and then we transition back into a more unsettled pattern. As far as snow potential for the Southeast, because I know you guys have been asking me this, here in the Carolinas, we've gotten squat at this point. We really, really do need to rely on what's called the Pacific North American Oscillation, the PNA. And right now it's negative, which actually does not favor winter weather here in the Southeast. It favors more of a trough in the west and more of a ridge just off the Southeast coast. What we need to do is see it go positive. We need to see that lining up with storms. Well, I do have some somewhat better news in that the trend is for this to be relatively positive throughout the month of February here and right into the beginning of March. There are dips here. The green is the mean, and that doesn't mean a whole lot to us. But if you see the general spread, it is more on the positive side here, especially the second, third, and fourth weeks of February. So we can't cancel winter at this point. There's still going to be some potential for something to happen. It's just not really crystal clear to me yet at this point. Another thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is what's going on here in the South Pacific. We've seen a lot of tropical activity pick up here near Madagascar and now near the eastern portion of Australia. What's going on here is you see some warming taking place in the ocean water temperatures north of New Zealand, north and east of Australia, east of Indonesia. This is, in fact, geothermal activity going on here in the South Pacific that is warming up these water temperatures. And this is going to change the world's climate here again. We're going to go through another shift. I don't deny climate change one bit. I just think a lot of it is more natural than maybe what we are being led to believe at this point. But when we see this warming across this area, that is something that very much needs to be watched as we head into our next tropical season. You can see this change just in the last week. Let me make this bigger for you guys here. And it's pretty significant. 2 degrees Celsius in 7 days with respect to the average is very significant here. And you see that taking place across this region here. This is all geothermal activity. I've been watching this here pretty closely, and it's leading to significant warming here between Australia and New Zealand. In the short term, that could mean a flurry of tropical activity that we need to watch closely in Australia and across the Southwest Pacific Islands. In the longer term, this is going to help our El Nino transition very quickly into a La Nina and cause more problems down the road here. It could mean more active severe weather and tornadoes when we get into April and May across the plains in the Southeast and Illinois again. Right now, we're definitely in a pretty strong El Nino, but nothing compared to 2015. So it's not as strong as what people were talking about, but strong enough to cause a pretty classic El Nino pattern where we have been dealing with these significant storms over portions of the West, very heavy rain across the South and across Florida here. But as we move along past that, the prediction here is, and I lost my, oh, there it is. The prediction here is for El Nino to come to an abrupt end. It's going to transition very quickly this spring, and there's a high likelihood that we have a La Nina in place for the heat of the summer and for the bulk of our tropical season coming up here later on. You can see the models all show a pretty good cliff dive here, and by the time we get into July and August, we are likely dealing with a La Nina. Now, what that means here is enhanced tropical activity. And I'm not going to go out there with a record season forecast, but it very well could get to that point. We see here this summer, July, August, and September, a very active precipitation forecast expected. And it does favor more activity than what we saw last year in the Gulf and in the Western Caribbean. So this is just a heads up right now. This is not, I'm going to scare you into oblivion or anything like that, but definitely be ready this hurricane season. I do think we could see a much more active year like we saw in 2020 or 2021. That's definitely on the table here. The waters are predicted to be above average across this entire basin. So even though we had a very busy year in the Atlantic last year, we had fewer impacts this year. That I think is going to shift. So that's what I'll be talking about in the coming months here. Thank you all so much for your time today. I hope you have a great Friday. Please be safe out there. And as always, I do ask you, if you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please consider doing that as I continue to engage you guys with what's to come here with detrimental weather. You guys mean a lot to me. I thank you for your time. I don't take any one person for granted. I apologize that I can't respond to everybody's requests and all that. As the channel grows and my time continues to lessen, I just don't have that, unfortunately, but I will do my very best. But I pray about you guys, and you mean a lot to me. I do that because I'm a Christian, and I give all the glory to God, who has blessed me in every day so that I can bless you guys, whether or not you choose to believe what I believe. And again, that's not up to me to judge. It is not certainly not my call. I'm not the person that judges, but I do share the good news because it means so much to me. To have a fruitful life, to live in God's glory every day means a lot to me. And Galatians 5:22, Paul tells the Church of Galatians Church of Galatia that, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. And they that are Christ's have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not be desirous of vainglory, provoking one another and envying one another. It's very easy to say that there's religious differences. A lot of people don't believe in the world. A lot of difficult things have happened. This is nothing new. This has gone on for thousands of years. But if you truly want to live a fruitful life, I truly believe you need to have the joy of Jesus Christ in your life. That's what I want to share. Yes, there's long suffering. Yes, there's temperance. There are things we would love to do. We would love to take all the glory for ourselves. But we have to give that all over to God and just trust in him and trust that Jesus, when he was crucified with those affections and lusts, that those sins have been cleansed of us and we can live eternally with him. And for me, that means so much because I have felt so much relief knowing that that baggage has been taken away from me and that I can have a fruitful life in the Spirit of Jesus Christ. And that is to have love for you, to live in joy, to live in peace. And yes, I am going to suffer because I am not living out my fleshly desires so much as giving all the glory to God. I'm not taking the credit for my success, giving God all that success. But it's incredible to know that you can kind of offload what you're going through onto somebody bigger and more powerful. And in this case, that's God through his son, Jesus. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. I am happy to pray for you. I pray for everybody here. But if you have a specific request, I will be flexing my prayer muscles and praying for you and knowing that God is going to come through. It may not be on the timeline you want it to be or that I want it to be, but it will happen. So I hope you all have a great day, and I will again be on tomorrow morning. God bless you. There's my hand.